Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today we'll be discussing a case where a young woman, freshly engaged to her new fiancé, raced home in an attempt to beat a treacherous snowstorm. But when she hadn't been seen or heard from by the following morning, her friends and family feared the worst. Later that morning, shortly after receiving an anonymous tip, police located the female's abandoned vehicle, riddled with evidence of a struggle. As authorities uncovered numerous clues throughout their search, one thing became clear: that the victim within the vehicle could not have survived this attack. With the hunt for a potential killer now underway, investigators felt the pressure of not only locating their suspect, but also finding the still missing woman. Now, over 30 years later, perhaps with the collective impact of citizen detectives and public assistance, this terrible tragedy can finally be solved. Today's case is about the disappearance and presumed murder of Sheree Magaro. Sheree Marie Magaro was born on October 23, 1956, to parents Thomas and Mary Grace Utes. She grew up in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, with one sister named Vicky. She later attended Cedar Crest High School, also located in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, and graduated in 1975. After she graduated high school, she attended modeling school for a little while and even taught modeling for a short time as well. However, come 1977, Sheree started a job as an executive assistant in the wagering department at a company called Control Data Corp., which, based on what I can find about the company, had manufactured lottery system computers and operated those systems in several states, including Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, and Washington state. Then, sometime in 1982, Sheree met her future husband, Michael Magaro, and shortly after the two had wed, they had their first son, Tony, when Sheree was 26 years old. But marital bliss didn't last for Sheree and Michael, and a divorce was soon on the horizon. The couple officially split in 1985, with Sheree retaining full custody of their young son. During that same year, though, Sheree ended up meeting a man named Frank Brown Jr., who was an employee of the Delaware Lottery Commission. If I had to take a guess, I'd think they likely met through work. But either way, the two were totally smitten with each other, and after a little over a year of dating, they decided to get married. At this time, though, Sheree was still living alone in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in her mobile home located in what I believe is pronounced as the Willow Trailer Park, while Frank was living roughly 2 hours away in Kennedyville, Maryland. Even though the couple was in a long-distance relationship, they still made an effort to see each other regularly, with Sheree making the 2-hour drive down to Kennedyville almost every weekend. She often brought Tony, her son, with her, and Frank and he were building a strong bond. However, on the weekend of February 20th through the 22nd of 1987, Sheree was visiting Frank as she often did, but this time she had made the trip down to Kennedyville by herself and left Tony with her parents for them to watch him for the weekend. Also, I had just mentioned that Sheree and Frank had decided to get married after a year of dating. Well, that weekend that she'd gone down there, on the 20th or the 21st, is when they'd officially gotten engaged. Her mother, Mary Grace, told Ted Cadell for the Morning News about how excited Sheree was about their engagement. She stated, quote, "She was going to sell her trailer and marry him. They had discussed it that Saturday night. She said, 'I can't wait to tell you all about it,'" end quote.
I find it odd that they'd be dating for such a short period of time, choose to get married, and still be living in a long-distance relationship.
I mean, not everybody takes a really long time to decide, though. I know,
but if you're going to get married, why are you going to get married and still be living 2 hours away from each other?
Well, like her mom just said, though, in that quote, she was going to sell her trailer and marry him, so I'm assuming she was probably going to move closer, or maybe they were going to, like, meet in the middle or something.
Yeah, but imagine marrying somebody without actually living with them.
Hey, I don't know. A lot of people do it. A lot of people do it.
And probably a lot of them get divorced after that because you don't know somebody until you live with them.
I think people will hate you for saying that.
I'm just saying, you don't really know somebody unless you live with them.
I agree with that completely, yes. But not everyone thinks the same way we do.
Okay, so February 20th to the 22nd, that's when they got engaged.
Yeah, so...
And that's when she went down there alone without her son.
Yes, so the 20th was the Friday, 21st was the Saturday, and then the 22nd was the Sunday. So the 21st, which her mom said it was the Saturday that they had talked about getting married, so I think they officially got engaged on the 21st. But yes, it was this weekend.
So was Tony staying with Michael for the weekend, or was he staying with the parents?
He was with his grandparents.
His grandparents.
Yeah,
okay.
So Sheree's parents.
All right.
So after the excitement of the weekend's developments settled down, Sheree unfortunately needed to get back to reality. She had work on Monday morning. So on Sunday night, February 22nd, she planned to make the 2-hour drive home to get back to Harrisburg to get to work on time Monday morning. But this was a little bit out of the ordinary for her, as her normal routine was to wake up really early on Monday mornings whenever she'd stay at Frank's place and make the drive back to Pennsylvania then.
Yeah, it's even stranger knowing that, you're now within this bliss. You just got engaged. You would think that she would want to stay as long as possible. So if her normal habit was to leave Monday morning, why would she be leaving Sunday night now? Well,
I'm about to tell you. She did have good reason for wanting to leave early. You see, the weather forecast for the evening of Sunday, February 22nd, 1987 was not great. Actually, it was pretty horrible. There was going to be a really awful snowstorm hitting the area that night, so Sheree made the decision to leave Sunday night instead of Monday to try and beat the storm, especially considering that the roads could have been really bad the following morning and maybe she would have been late to work. So it kind of does make sense.
Yeah, that's fine. I get that.
And at one point that night, Sheree had even called her mother to let her know what her plan was, most likely because Mary Grace had Tony for the night, so she probably wanted to keep her in the loop on when she'd be picking him up, all that good stuff. The Cecil Whig actually reported on the conversation the two had when she'd called that night. Mary Grace stated the following, quote, "She called me and told me she was leaving because it was snowing. I told her, don't come home because you will be traveling with the storm. She said she had to come home to go to work," end quote. So, with her mind made up, Sheree hopped into her 1972 or 1976 gray four-door Ford Torino to make the trip home. And I say 1972 or 1976 because I'm really not sure what year the car was. Both years have been reported a lot, and I've only seen one very small picture of her car, so I cannot tell you for sure what year it is.
Let me see it.
I'll show you in a minute. I can't show you just yet.
Okay.
But anyway, as she got ready to leave, it's reported that her fiancé gave her roughly $20 for gas in case she needed to stop and fill up her tank during her trip home. And then she left Frank's house in Kennedyville sometime between 9:30 and 9:45 p.m. that Sunday night. The following morning arrived, though, and Sheree was nowhere to be found. She hadn't made it home or to work, and no one had seen her since she'd left her fiancé's house the night prior. At this point, I am sure everyone was incredibly worried about her, not only because she just wasn't the type to just not show up somewhere, but also because of the snowstorm that had hit the area the night before. I had mentioned that it was going to be a pretty bad storm, and I was not kidding. Nearly 18 inches of snow had been dumped in the area overnight.
I mean, at that point, can you just be like, I can't get to work?
I mean, probably.
If a crazy storm is happening like that, call your boss. Just be like, hey.
So she's in another state. I don't know if that's like it, but.
I don't know.
Also, I did want to mention that somebody on Reddit had actually posted an article from ABC 6 Action News from 2017 that was like a review almost of something that happened in the news 30 years prior. And of course, it was this snowstorm. And there's like a ton of pictures of the snowfall in the area. And it kind of helps you to understand like how horrible this snowstorm was. So I'm going to send it to you so you can take a peek. But
well, it makes me think like you have 18 inches of snow. It's the blizzard of 78?
Here,
was
yes.
Crazy. Here?
Yeah.
It makes me think like people couldn't get around. You couldn't drive. You couldn't get anywhere. You had to shovel pathways to get around.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see this pic.
Also, something that's totally wild in this article, it's like, the forecast for Philadelphia for Thursday, February 23rd, 2017 is partly sunny, warm, and 70 degrees in February.
Global warming!
Yes, seriously.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it was a bad snowstorm, but it's not like the blizzard of 78. It's...
Says the man that lives in Rhode Island, and I bet everybody in Georgia is like screaming right now.
I guess, yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, but, I mean, I assume she probably could have made her way back.
You think that she could make her way back in that Ford Torino?
Well,
a rear-wheel drive vehicle.
Who knows if she had snow tires or if she had chains on her tires because it's winter and you knew there was going to be snow coming.
I mean, maybe, but I haven't seen anything reported about that. So.
Yeah. And if she's traveling with the storm and, maybe the storm isn't going faster than her, she's not actually driving through 18 inches of snow. She's driving with the storm.
Yeah, no, you're right about that.
So it's not 18 inches of snow, it's just dropping on her out of nowhere.
But either way, that's a lot of snow to fall in the area between like 10 o'clock at night when she was leaving to
not the best
morning. So it's heavy snowfall for sure.
Yeah, it's not the best thing to be driving through.
No, definitely not. Due to the fact that Sheree hadn't made it to home or work, I can only imagine the thoughts swirling through family members and loved ones' minds. They were probably thinking things along the lines of, did she get into a horrible accident or did she get stuck in the snow somewhere? Well, strangely enough, around 9:30 a.m. on Monday, February 23rd, an anonymous caller who was mentioned to be a male but gave no name, obviously hence the label of anonymous, but this person actually reached out to the local PD to alert them of a car that was found in a field near the Bohemia River Bridge in Cecil County, Maryland. And come to find out, that car was Sheree's. According to the Doe Network's write-up on Sheree's case, her car was found, quote, 100 feet west of State Route 213, 2.5 miles south of the Bohemia River Bridge, which is north of Cecilton, end quote. Sheree's car may have been found at this point, but she was not with it. When investigators arrived at the location where her car had been located and they reviewed the scene, things were immediately suspicious, and authorities knew they had a serious situation on their hands. As authorities inspected her car, they discovered a couple of things. First of all, I had just mentioned that roughly 1.5 feet of snow had come down on the area overnight. So, because of that, one might believe it to be odd that this car was driven all the way into a field with that much snow on the ground. Well, based on reporting on this case, there was actually only about 1 inch or 2 of snow under Sheree's car, with the rest of the field being covered in that 1.5 feet of snow. This immediately had authorities thinking about the timeline in which her car could have been placed there. Just based on when the snow had started falling the night prior and how much was under the car versus around it in the field, it seemed as though it could have been parked in that spot, which was roughly 100 or 200 feet into the field, sometime between 10 p.m. and 10:45 p.m. the night before.
So the only thing that you'd think of is, like, obviously if you're driving a vehicle, it's hot. So once it gets parked somewhere, if there's snow underneath, the heat from the vehicle may melt a little bit. So if there's only 1 inch under there at the time, maybe there was, 2 inches, 3 inches, which may potentially throw off the timeline a little bit, but it gives you a good idea of how long it was there.
Yeah.
And it couldn't have gotten there after much had fallen.
Exactly. You wouldn't be able to get through there. Exactly.
Right.
This is the dinky little picture I was telling you. It's the only one I found of her car.
Yeah, even if you pinch and zoom on it, it doesn't let you pinch and zoom that much. You'd have to, save the file and then edit it otherwise.
Yeah, so it's far into the field, which you can tell based on this photo.
It's probably at least 100 feet away.
Yep, exactly. But it's just hard to tell exactly what year it could have been. I was trying to really nail it down. I know it's probably insignificant, but just to say did it in fact have rear wheel drive? Was it good in the snow? Did it cause, any issues? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, if it's like a Gran Torino or, I know you said a Ford Torino, but it'd probably have rear wheel drive if it was like a muscle car or something like that.
Yeah, makes sense. But the snow under the car isn't what had police worried. One of the most disturbing discoveries had to do with the fact that there was actually blood found in Sheree's car after authorities had inspected it further.
Where was the blood?
We're getting there. Investigators had also found what was described as, quote, obvious signs of foul play inside the car, end quote. And what's discovered isn't confirmed right away by the media or authorities, but I will tell you that it is definitively confirmed later, and that's that authorities found not only blood, but also hair and human tissue in the back seat, as well as blood smeared on the outside door of Sheree's car. And finally, it appeared as though someone had attempted to set Sheree's Ford Torino on fire.
Probably didn't work because they didn't have some type of accelerant or, something to start the fire outside of maybe a lighter.
Mm-hmm.
So a lighter and maybe wet clothing, but because of the snow falling, it was creating dampness that stopped them from being able to light it. I wonder, maybe she picked up like a hitchhiker. Maybe somebody was stranded out in the snow being like, oh, I need help, or whatever. And she offered to pick them up, and maybe they went after her like that.
It's very interesting, like, when you come up with these things so early on, but I really want to give you more because there's a lot to this story, so.
Well, I try to think of other things I've dealt with, other things I've learned, other stories I've heard, and take information from those to try and formulate some type of could-haves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just based
I
off
get
of the
it.
small amount of information that we have at the time.
Yep.
And it's interesting to know how it evolves as I learn more information, either solidifying the original idea or changing it based on, gathering more and more info.
Exactly. And even though I won't give it to you right away in the beginning, it's like I'm not gonna give you like what actually happened, but I like to see like your reaction on things that you might guess up front and see if it's like, oh, did investigators even think about that? Or was that something that wasn't even considered? Are you coming up with something that maybe no one ever thought of before or something along those lines?
Yeah, it's either, maybe she could have stopped and picked somebody up or her fiancé had given her money for gas. Maybe she stopped to fill up because she didn't want to stop later when, maybe the storm was heavier.
Yep.
And somebody could have tried to abduct her and steal the car at a gas station or something like that. But
yeah, all good possibilities. But back to the attempt at burning her car, which I will say it did go out. I think we kind of got to that point already, but authorities did bring in the fire marshal to try and assist in finding out exactly how said fire was started. It's later uncovered that whoever attempted to set it on fire did so from the left back seat, and that there was, quote, a flammable liquid found near the vehicle when authorities had arrived on scene that Monday morning.
An accelerant.
Yes, exactly, and you can assume that that's probably what they used to light the seat on fire. But even with their efforts to try and, I assume, destroy evidence by attempting to burn the vehicle, it wasn't successful, and it probably goes back to what you were just saying about the snow falling. Who knows if the windows were open? Could that have, saturated the seat in water? And then, obviously it went out.
Yeah, and you said that it was there was evidence of foul play. Who knows if there was a struggle back there, and if the person that was in the vehicle struggling with Sheree, had been picked up or something, and they were covered in snow and they were wet.
Yep.
Moisture could have been spread around the cabin.
Nope, all
making it all difficult.
Makes sense, so. Now, at this point, after all of this concerning evidence is found, authorities wasted absolutely no time when it came to their investigation, as well as the search for the now missing woman. First and foremost, the car, with all of this important evidence inside, was immediately brought in to be analyzed. In terms of the examination of the car, authorities stated for the Evening Sun, quote, a great portion of the crime lab's resources are being devoted to this evidence today, end quote. Also, in terms of the search of the area, the PD did not mess around there either. Over 100 police officers from over 4 states assisted in the search for Sheree, as well as over 300 volunteers, dozens of military personnel, and countless firefighters. The areas searched included the field where Sheree's car was found, as well as the woods nearby and the surrounding roads as well. Not only that, authorities also had brought in Connecticut State Police to assist in the search, because at the time, that department actually had specifically trained cadaver dogs, 3 of them in fact. The dogs they had in Maryland were only trained to, quote, find people who are lost or hiding, or to find drugs and explosives, end quote.
Was the field where her vehicle was found, was that on the route that she would normally take?
I believe so, yes.
So it wasn't like totally out of the way?
No.
All right.
And just based on the statement that I just mentioned regarding bringing in cadaver dogs and that, they are specifically trained to find a body versus the dogs that were in Maryland, I think it's becoming clear that authorities were probably searching for Sheree's body at this point.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So this anonymous caller called at 9:30 a.m. the morning after she went missing.
Correct.
If it had just snowed, it's probably freezing out. There probably aren't a lot of people walking around in this field.
Correct.
There was some type of struggle there. There's no body left there. How did this other person get away?
Yep.
Are you looking for boot prints? Are you looking for blood trail? If she had been attacked, did she run off in a different direction? Obviously, as snow melts and the blood, melts with it or seeps into the ground with it melting, that would be harder to do. But these are the type of things that I assume that they would have been looking for. from the get-go.
Yeah, and I think it's hard because you have to wonder, especially with the timeline of things, which we'll definitely dive into this a lot more later, but you have to consider the fact that if authorities are set on the fact that her car was left there between 10 and, say, 11, just to give it a concrete hour time frame, say it was, between 10 and 11 the night before, if you're considering that, and if the person did this, and if this happened at that time frame, you've got like almost 12 hours now of snow accumulation, considering it, stopped sometime in the morning, to cover footprints, to cover tire tracks.
Yeah, I think that could be something that ends up being a big hindrance, that a lot of the stuff, like you said, was probably covered up with the additional accumulation.
Yeah. All right, so a little bit ago, I had mentioned the Bohemia River and the Bohemia River Bridge. Those were both searched as well. And I do also just want to mention that I guess the bridge was being like reconstructed at the time. I'm not sure how much that really goes into anything in terms of searching it, or if investigators thought it was possible. Someone could have even driven over it, but I did just want to bring that little tidbit of info to light because maybe it could be important later, maybe not, but it's good to know.
So it couldn't have been driven over at the time?
I'm not sure. Like, there was mention of construction workers working on the bridge. It was being like, that was the term, reconstructed. Mm-hmm. So does that mean like it's not stable enough to drive over?
If it's, not necessarily, if it's like a main thoroughway, they would do it very similar to like where bridges are being worked on near us.
Yeah.
They work on a section. It may limit the amount of travel that can be over it. Instead of being, like 2 lanes of travel, and maybe
just
knocked down to 1.
Yeah.
But if it's a big thoroughfare or a big, a heavily traveled route,
then
they'd probably
maybe
try to keep it open.
Okay.
So, but that's good to know too, that people were working over there. And
exactly. So what could they have seen? Could someone have found something? Something along those lines, right?
Yeah, because they probably get there. I know it snowed and everything, but if their work hadn't been canceled, they're probably getting there 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, a couple hours earlier before this call came in.
Yep.
Even earlier than, if the call came in at 9:30.
Yep.
Nobody's getting there for a while.
Yeah.
So
could the anonymous caller have been a construction worker?
It could have been.
And, sometimes, like you've said before, people just don't like cops and they don't want to, get involved with the police, and maybe they just didn't want to say who they were.
Yeah, I mean, you're still helping.
Exactly. Yep.
Anonymous callers that are given information or given directions or something to where something may be fishy. Still helping.
Exactly. But anyway, during the search of all these locations, a few things of note were uncovered. On February 24th, the day after Sheree's car was found in the field, a Maryland Department of Natural Resources officer stumbled upon a shirt on the side of Route 213, which was the same road that the field was on. Said shirt that was found was described as a plaid shirt and was also covered in blood. At first, investigators stated that they were unsure if the garment was even connected to the case, but they would have it forensically tested along with the car to determine its potential significance and what may have happened to Sheree.
I mean, do you really think it's not connected?
Hey, I don't know.
What are the odds that you have this car left in a field, there's blood in the car, there's blood on the outside of the car, there's human tissue inside the vehicle, there was clearly foul play afoot, and then you find a bloody, like a shirt that's drenched in blood?
Yes,
on the same road where this just occurred?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not saying that I don't think it's connected, but you have to consider like how authorities are acting at this point. This is one day into their investigation. They find this. What if they say, oh, it's definitely connected, and then it comes back and it's like, oh, it's actually not a match?
I'm just saying, if I knew that this had happened and I found that, I'd be like, hell yes, we got something.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Also, the location where the shirt was found may have prompted the additional search of the Bohemia River, as it's reported that the shirt was found in close proximity to the bridge and the river. It was later mentioned that nothing was near the bridge or in the river, though. According to investigators, quote, there were no tire prints or tracks or anything by the bridge. We took dirt samples and grass samples to see if the car was driven in any other area, but it wasn't. The construction workers looked the best they could. They said she couldn't be in there, end quote. And so I had mentioned before, and now we're kind of getting into it a little bit now, but the bridge was being reconstructed. There were construction workers in the area, but then this investigator's making a comment about the construction workers doing their best to look for stuff. Why aren't investigators doing it?
I would hope that they all are, but they just commented that the construction workers were assisting.
I hope so. That's actually literally what I wrote in here, too. I was like, I really hope, like, I assume.
No, they're not outsourcing their work to the fucking construction workers.
Imagine. I was like, that's just such a random thing to say, though. Why wouldn't it be like, we did our best and the construction workers helped and they scoured the area too?
I think it was probably
interesting.
I think it was probably like insinuated that obviously we are out here looking for everything.
Yeah.
But because this bridge is being worked on so close by to where this incident probably occurred, they're doing their best to look around as well.
Makes sense, yeah.
But see, I don't think that the car would have been driven to, at least what I'm getting right now.
Yeah.
I'm feeling like the incident, like the struggle, I feel like it happened
in the field.
In the field.
Okay, that's a good point.
So I don't think that this vehicle was like driven somewhere and, you know, a body was dumped out of it and then it was brought to this field to be set on fire. If you're going to light a vehicle on fire, are you going to do it 100 feet off the road? In a field? Yeah. That everybody in the world can see that anybody's driving down that street?
No, it's definitely interesting, and I'm curious if your opinion will stay the same or change as we keep going.
Yeah, I just think it's a weird place to dump a car.
Oh, for
to
sure.
try and
it's
set on fire.
Super weird.
I mean, maybe if something happened elsewhere, maybe they tried to light the fire elsewhere. It didn't work, so then they just dumped the car in the field.
I mean, maybe, but then, like, why would the flammable liquid still be near the car? Like, did they, like, try and douse it and then, you know, just forgot it or something? I don't really know. But there was one other thing that I did want to mention as well that I don't know a ton about, and that's the fact that there was apparently some other clothing found, like, kind of strewn about around Sheree's car, but it hasn't been released what those clothes were, who they might have belonged to, or if they had significance in the case. So I don't know if they were Sheree's clothes, maybe they were the clothes she was wearing, maybe they were clothes from like a suitcase or like a duffel bag that she brought with her because she was sleeping over at her fiancé's. So I'm not entirely sure, but I do think it's important to note that there were other clothes found in the area too.
So did she usually travel to see her now fiancé with like a suitcase, or did she have belongings that stayed there?
See, I don't know. I wish I knew that. That would be good information to have.
Could, like, is the clothing like one set of clothing, which could have been what she was wearing?
Exactly, and was there a sexual assault involved? Too?
Right, and also that plaid shirt that was drenched in blood, did they narrow down, okay, was this Frank's? Was this hers? Was this her assailant's? Did she
all good questions.
Did she injure her assailant? And
that's why it was
blood? That was his blood all over the shirt?
That's a possibility.
Never know.
So another important item discovered during the search of the field and that whole area was Sheree's purse. It was found somewhere between 25 and 100 yards from her car. The exact distance is unclear, as it's been reported a bit differently in quite a few publications, but I've also seen it reported that there was jewelry found either in her purse, or I have seen it mentioned in her car, but that's just yet another thing that kind of changes over time. But either way, the fact that the valuable jewelry was left behind and not taken, I think is something of importance. And it's also been mentioned that her purse was, like, gone through, like someone went through it. So clearly, if they were looking for something, it certainly wasn't the jewelry if it was actually in the purse and then they just left it there.
Images of what could have happened, like, pop into my head. And I'm wondering, like, say she picked up this person, whatever.
So you're working along the lines of if she picked up a hitchhiker right now in this thought process that you've got going on.
A hitchhiker, somebody that appeared to have been broken down, so like they faked that they had been broken down, but maybe they wanted to, you know, attack somebody.
Okay.
Maybe they had a motive like that to begin with. And, you know, maybe a struggle ensued while she was driving, drove off into the field.
Okay,
maybe it wasn't like put there on purpose. Maybe, you know, drove off the road.
And that's just where it landed.
100 feet isn't too far if you're traveling at a decent clip or whatever, but yeah.
And considering sliding too, because of snow, so that would make sense.
So say that's where, you know, the actual incident happened. She ends up fighting off this attacker who maybe she injures. And she's just interested in getting the fuck out of there.
Yeah.
So maybe she runs towards the river.
Okay, yep.
Not realizing the area. It's probably pitch black out there.
Yeah.
Then I don't know if we found her body.
I'm not saying anything.
So maybe she ends up in the river by accident. I know that investigators have said they haven't found anything at the river, But if it's a running body of water,
it could come up in another spot later or something like that. Yep.
But then I picture this assailant that was injured.
Yep.
Grabbing the purse, being pissed off that, she's gotten away, she's injured him.
I'm going to steal her shit or
rifling
whatever.
Through whatever just to grab money or anything. Then walking out to the road.
Yep.
Maybe his shirt ends up being drenched in blood.
Yep.
If it's freaking cold out and you got your shirt drenched in blood and that thing starts freezing on you, you might be better off just freaking
taking it off. Yep.
Just popped into my head. It's probably totally inaccurate, but
it's very interesting, a lot of the things that you say, though, because some of it I've thought of, some of it I haven't, and as we continue to work through, you're totally going to kind of see where I've landed on things, so I'm curious just to see kind of where we end up. But.
All right.
So roughly 5 or 6 days after Sheree went missing, as the snow was melting in the field where her car was found, additional items were located nearby. Authorities ended up finding a tube of lipstick as well as Sheree's driver's license, and they were found pretty much right in the same spot where her purse had been. So if I had to guess, it likely had spilled out over there and was covered by the snow. And John, that goes along with what you were just saying, say this individual rifled through her purse and then they just tossed it, and then, it dumps out all over the snow. Some of it's covered. The purse might be on the top or it could have moved, whatever.
Right.
But I think this also kind of lends credence to the timeline. And when the car was placed in the field, you have to consider how much snow came down after the fact. A driver's license and a tube of lipstick are very small items that could work their way down in the snow, whereas a purse is a little bit heavier. It might just kind of sit on top.
Or even so, it might be able to be seen.
Easier yeah,
than,
exactly. Yep.
Smaller items.
So now, at this time, it was roughly a few days into the search for Sheree, and authorities were still continuing their probe of the area, but there were certainly things that were hindering their investigation, namely, all that damn snow. It was definitely the biggest obstacle thus far, and Chuck Jackson, who was a spokesperson for the local police department, even told the Evening News, quote, "The deep snow really hampered our search for clues," end quote. It honestly seems like the only helpful thing that came from the heavy snowfall had to do with investigators being able to nail down some semblance of a timeline of when they believed Sheree's car might have been placed in the field. And overall, their thought was that it had been ditched and left there during said snowstorm. Not after, not before, during. Which then kind of made me think about the vehicle the potential killer must have been driving. And I say killer because I think at this point it's clear that Sheree most likely did not survive this attack. I think whatever car that the killer was driving would have to have been good in the snow, and they would have had to be able to get out of the area and not get stuck themselves. And also, considering the location where Sheree's car was found, it seemed to be more of a truck route or nearby to one, so it made me think that maybe it could have been a long-haul trucker.
So you're thinking a Mack truck?
Yeah, an 18-wheeler.
Not a pickup truck?
I mean, it could have been that as well, but I was just thinking because this is a truck route or nearby to a truck route. So you would have a lot of those cross-country truckers that are delivering supplies and whatever else coming through that area. We've heard a million times about different trucker serial killers like Dr. No and all these other ones that have come up. So it's definitely something that could be possible. And it just kind of had my brain turning, thinking that could this have been a possibility that it was a serial killer, unfortunately, as much as I hate that word and that term and all things serial killer, but
I think it could be, which is more along the lines of what I was hinting at when I said somebody was acting like their vehicle was broken down.
Yeah.
They're in the middle of a storm. I need help. Somebody might be more inclined to stop. Somebody that may not normally stop may be more inclined to stop to help somebody because it's oh, shit, serious snowstorm. I don't want to leave this person stranded.
Yeah, that ain't going to be me.
Right, but
I would never be doing that.
But that could have been this person's plan the whole time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I think you probably hear about that a lot more back in the 80s and 90s. Today, I feel like it's definitely different. People are more cautious, but
yeah.
But before we get ahead of ourselves with speculation, I do want to keep going with the story. There is a lot more that you need to know before we can really nail anything down. So I mentioned the snow being a huge issue in terms of finding evidence, and that includes the inability to find any tire tracks for any other cars that might have been in the area that night or any footprints that could have been there either. We'd kind of touched on that before. Now, something else interesting that was reported on within the first week of Sheree going missing is that someone else had actually called in regarding her case. And if kind of what we were talking about a little bit before is correct here, maybe it could have been the killer calling in, or it could have been the killer making that anonymous phone call. We were kind of saying oh, could it have been a construction worker or someone else in the area, whatever. But let me just tell you what this person says.
Yeah.
So the following is reported in the Baltimore Sun on February 26th, 1987. So this was 4 days after Sheree went missing. Quote, yesterday afternoon, in a series of calls to the Sun and at least 3 Baltimore television stations, a man who did not give his name said that police would not find a body, end quote. It continues, quote, she's alive, the caller said. You can find her in La Plata. It's all part of an insurance scam, end quote.
Well, at first I was like, okay, this sounds like, a serial killer or something of that nature.
Yeah.
But then when they're like, oh, it's all part of an insurance scam, that made me think that this person's just fucking nuts.
Yeah, okay, so I was thinking the same thing. I was like, where are you going with this right now? Do you agree with what I'm thinking?
Well, I mean, context matters.
Yeah.
So when you were saying, well, I got to tell you what this person said.
Yes.
And if you had just stopped and been like, you're never going to find a body.
Mm-hmm.
That could be oh, that's, the killer just reveling in what they've done.
Well, yeah, that
attention.
reminds me of Gary Grant Jr., where the guy was like, you'll never catch me.
Right.
So it's could it have been that?
Right.
But
now
then
that
I
they're
read
giving
literally
this outlandish thing about, oh, it's an insurance. You'll find her in La Plata. This is an insurance scam.
But could it be the killer just trying to fuck with people? Because
I don't know, that's weird.
It is weird, but I don't think it's something that you can totally rule out. I mean, if you're a serial killer, you're probably fucking tapped in the head.
Yeah, but I think it's weird. If you wanted to, lead police on a wild goose chase or, you got some sick enjoyment out of sending them somewhere or leading them to the end.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's weird to say, it's fine. You could say, oh, she's still alive. If, she's just incapacitated and if she's left there and nobody's ever found her, she's going to die.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a serial killer type thing.
Yeah,
or
okay. I see what you're
sociopath
saying.
or psychopath type thing.
Yeah.
But to say she's still alive, you'll find her in La Plata, cut it there. Okay, serial killer.
Yeah, it's that
then
insurance scam.
It's all an insurance scam.
Yeah.
That makes me think this person's just fucking nuts.
Yeah, and as we're talking it through and I'm thinking a little more about it, it's clearly whoever this was did not know enough about the scene, because if we're knowing that there's human tissue, that there's blood all over the car, all of these things, and if authorities are kind of the mindset already that she's not alive, then why would they ever believe someone saying, oh, it's an insurance scam, she's alive? They're like, come on, man. You clearly know nothing about the scene or anything that happened there.
Yes and no. I'm both ways on it, because if you were trying to, conduct some type of insurance scam, you would have to leave human tissue somewhere. You would have to make it look like it was a murder. You would have to make it look like you are in danger, and after X amount of years, you are, of not finding you, they can legally declare you dead. Yeah, deceased.
Well, son of a bitch, John. We start here, we go there, we ping pong back and forth, and I'm like, well, now I don't know where I land.
Yes, but I think the fact that this person called multiple news agencies, multiple television places, gave a ton of different information, or contacted a bunch of different places saying that this was an insurance scam.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think they're crazy. I don't think it's somebody that has direct knowledge of what happened.
Yeah. All right. I think I'm probably of the same mindset, but I think a lot of the things that you were saying were things to just keep in the back of your mind as we keep going. Now, after about a week of authorities searching the area along Route 213 in Maryland, the foot searches came up empty and the cadaver dogs didn't hit on any scents that might have led them to a body. But as I mentioned before, it seemed as though this was a recovery mission, not a missing persons investigation at this point. And by this time, roughly a week in, authorities did state, publicly, that they believed Sheree to be deceased, just based on what was discovered at the scene. So, with their search efforts petering out, authorities turned to the local residents to ask them to search their own properties to see if they'd be able to find any sign of the missing woman. But it seems as though those efforts were fruitless as well. Even with nothing else coming from the searches, that wasn't going to stop investigators' efforts. They were determined. Chuck Jackson, that spokesperson for the PD that I mentioned before, told the Morning News, quote, You have to be able to look in every nook and cranny. There may be one nook we haven't looked into yet, because we certainly have looked in an awful lot of crannies. I always have to think there's a chance, no matter how slim it may seem. We have to have hope we will find her alive." End quote.
I don't want to make a joke about it, but I bet that guy's breakfast was Thomas's English muffins.
I don't want to make a joke, but I'm going to make a joke.
Talking about all them nook and crannies.
I know. It was just, that quote just always gets me every time I read it. I'm like, we might not have looked into the nook, but we looked in all the crannies. Like, it's just such an odd thing to say. But, I mean, it's kind of obvious. They're saying, you know, all these things about it doesn't seem like she could have survived this attack and all this other stuff. But, of course, they're going to have hope because they can't say for sure. But I think it's also one of those things where it's like,
I want to know more about like the scene and about the car and why they're so determined that she's deceased or that she's been killed.
Yep.
If there's two people in there,
yep,
how can you be so sure that she didn't injure the other person? Have they DNA tested? Do we know more about, you know, was there blood on the driver's seat, which would make them be more inclined to believe that she was the one injured?
Mm-hmm.
How was there stuff in the back seat? Like, I want to know more about that to know how they're so sure that it's her that was hurt.
All right, well, you're going to have to wait a little bit because I have something else to tell you. So after this statement was made in the media about the nooks and crannies, there was really nothing else released to the press for roughly a month. But, oh man, what comes out after just a little bit of waiting is pretty wild. And I can see why authorities were hush-hush for a little bit.
Does that have to do with Mike?
No.
Okay.
I think it might surprise you. So, for starters, apparently, the morning that Sheree's car was found abandoned, a man had tried to use one of her credit cards at a Sears store in Bel Air, Maryland. Said Sears location was roughly somewhere between 50 to 65 miles from Route 213 where the car was found, which amounts to about an hour and 15-minute drive. Now, earlier, we had talked about how Sheree's purse had been gone through and that expensive jewelry was left behind. Well, now it seems like maybe this person had actually been looking for credit cards to take, maybe? But then I wonder why. Like, why would you take a credit card rather than jewelry that could say, I don't know, be pawned? Wouldn't a credit card be more easily traced than jewelry?
I guess it depends on the times. Because nowadays, if you were to steal jewelry, if you were to steal any valuable, and you go pawn it, you have to have an ID. They document who sells it.
True. Yep.
And if that's like always been the case, like they're not just going to take in anything from anybody to kind of prevent like receiving stolen goods or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know what the whole logistics of that are, but if you think back in the day, like security cameras weren't everywhere in the 80s.
Yeah.
You could very easily just go use a credit card.
Well, actually, it's funny because, like, I feel like when I research a case and I'm, like, in my own head about it, I have, like, this one-track mind almost, and I have a hard time, like, branching out and trying to, like, think of other things that this could connect to. But then when we sit down and we talk it through, like, things start to pop through my head. And this brought me right back, like what you're saying, like, oh, was it like this during this time, whatever. It brought me back to actually Julianne Miller's case. Do you remember her boyfriend had, like, obviously people thought it was the boyfriend who was involved, and then they were looking for jewelry of hers that was pawned, and it was his brother
that had pawned it.
And they knew that.
Right.
So I would have to guess then that they probably would take your ID, or they would take some sort of identification and take down your name.
Well, that was in the 90s, right?
No. 1982.
Julianne Miller was 82?
Yeah, and she was in Connecticut.
Wow. I don't know why I thought that was in the 90s.
I don't know, but so that makes me think then, if it was like that back in 82.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess it had to be then.
Yeah.
They would document who it was that, you know.
So this is the thing. I ask a question, I answer my own freaking question by talking it through, though.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that's, like, good about this is, like, I could have all these thoughts up front, and then, like, once we talk about it, then you're like, oh, shit, this thing just popped in my head. So that's probably why then. Take a credit card. If all goes well with the credit card, they're not going to question you.
Right.
Interesting. So apparently, when this dude attempted to make that purchase at the Sears, the cashier tried to make what was reported as a, quote, routine credit check, which at first I was like, what the heck? Like, why are they trying to run this person's credit, like, at the register? I was very confused, but after...
Not the same thing.
Definitely not the same thing.
Yeah.
So after I researched a little bit more, I discovered that back in the day, this was like a way to confirm ownership of the card. And come to find out, the reason this credit check was even performed in the first place was because the card was declined due to it being maxed out. And of course, once the cashier pulled the information about the card, he realized that this man clearly wasn't Sheree, and he questioned him about it.
Uh-huh.
Well, the man apparently had an interesting story for why he was using Sheree's card. Ted Cadell's article in the Morning News gave further clarification on what the credit card stealing man's excuse was. It reads as follows, quote, "The man said he was an employee at the Aberdeen Proving Ground, living with his new bride at the Aberdeen Sheraton, and the card was still in her name. He was in a hurry, he said. He had to be back at work at noon," end quote.
What was he buying?
Not sure, unfortunately. So, hopefully not lingerie like fucking Frank Douglas.
Right. So back in the day, you're probably too young to remember this, but you've probably seen it in some movies and stuff, like Christmas Vacation, I think they do it. Home Alone, I think they do it.
Okay, yeah.
So back in the day, they used to take like an imprint of your credit card.
Okay, yeah, no, so I'm not that young, all right?
So they would put the credit card in that little machine, and then like the carbon copy and stuff, and then they would ride the credit card over it.
I just think about like using checks too. Like, you don't know, anyone could write you a fucking check.
Right.
You'd be like, have nowadays, no money.
But nowadays, you put it through electronically and it'll bounce immediately. But back in the day, again, before we had technology like this, you could get away with so much shit.
That's just so crazy. All right, so back to this guy and the whole credit card situation. Well, it's not like we really got off the topic, but the frustrating thing about this interaction is the fact that it was happening literally simultaneously to when Sheree's car was found and authorities had discovered these obvious signs of foul play. But investigators were not made aware of the suspicious Sears store transaction until way later that night. The cashier had no clue about Sheree's disappearance at that point, and then when he got home later on, I assume he probably watched the news, heard what was going on, and was like, holy crap, that guy tried to use this girl's card, so he then ended up calling police at that point.
It's tough to be like, oh, well, investigators didn't know about this and they didn't hear about it for hours later. It's like, even nowadays, things take time, and even with all the electronics and all the databases and stuff that we have available to us, stuff like that still takes time because, you know, you got to contact the right people. You got to be like, oh, contact a husband or somebody else and be like, do they have credit cards? Then check with the credit card company, and things still take time. So as frustrating as it is, it's understandable that, you know, there was a lapse in communication from that happening at the same time as the car being found. Yeah. It's just unfortunate.
Yep, exactly. Well, the cashier did provide a description of the man who attempted to use Sheree's card, and a sketch was developed from there. The description of the credit card thief is as follows, quote, "The man seen at the Sears store has a dark complexion and is in his 20s, about 5 feet 9 inches, 160 pounds, with short black hair, blue-green eyes, and a smooth, clean face," end quote. The sketch of this man wasn't released right away, though. Authorities held that close to the chest for roughly 3 to 4 weeks after he'd attempted this purchase at Sears because they wanted to see if he'd try and do it again with another of Sheree's cards. But after waiting that long without any further attempts, they decided to release the sketch of the man to the public and advised that they wanted to speak to this individual in regards to Sheree's case. So, John, I sent you a copy of the sketch, and for all our listeners, if you want to have a visual aid while we discuss, a copy of the sketch will be on our Instagram, Wicked Deeds Pod, as well as on our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com.
This is an interesting sketch.
Yes, it is. I'm very curious what your thoughts are here. Do you feel like he has a very dark upper lip?
At first, like before I enlarged it, I was like, is that a mustache?
That's what I thought too, and I was like, that's definitely a lip.
How often do you see in a sketch the suspect's teeth?
I was thinking the same thing, because you're like so focused on the lip, and then you're like, oh shit, there's teeth there.
Yeah, that's actually like, that's very interesting.
I think that's a pretty good sketch.
Yeah, and then you have the eyebrows too. I can't tell if that's shading on the top of the nose, like the bridge of the nose, or if that's, you know, kind of like a unibrow type deal going on.
Yeah, like was he a hairy individual?
Yeah, but, well, that could lend to the
Maybe
the dark
nationality?
complexion.
Or
yeah,
maybe
like
Italian.
Italian, Middle Eastern, something like that.
Yeah, definitely.
But based on the features alone, at least, it appears that they're white.
Yeah, agreed. But this wasn't the only person authorities wanted to talk to in regards to Sheree's disappearance, and it wasn't the only sketch released either. Apparently, another individual had made their way onto police's radar at this point, because witnesses had stated that they'd seen a freaking man in the area the night Sheree attempted to make her drive home, the same area where Sheree's car was later found. But based on several articles published on this piece of the story, it seemed as though authorities believed this guy may have just been a disabled motorist and that he himself may have also been a witness. Authorities had stated that he, quote, might be able to provide useful information, end quote. I mean, him being a disabled motorist or a stranded motorist or whatever they want to call him certainly doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility, at least to me, considering the weather. But there's a lot more to this, and I have a lot more opinions, which we're going to get into in just a second. But do you have thoughts so far, John? Because you're giving me a look.
Of course I have thoughts.
Yes, I would hope so.
We had talked about like disabled motor vehicle, disabled
motorist.
motorist.
I
and
know.
stuff like
The
that.
second I said that word, you like gave me this like little
Early
squinty eye
on,
look,
right.
like, ooh, what are you talking about?
But I mean, when did people see this guy? She left in the middle of the night. How good of a sketch would they be able to get from people giving a description of a guy that they saw in pitch black?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you, we're only halfway through here. We got a lot more to go. So
right. Yeah, I'm interested to see the sketch and I want to know more about it, but my spidey sense is tingling already. Like what I had assumed from the beginning, maybe
might
formulating
be correct,
into...
might be something along the lines of what happened. Yeah.
Right,
So
right.
For this next part, listen closely. This stranded motorist was described as, quote, dark complexioned, between 25 and 30 years old, about 5 feet, 10 inches tall, and weighing 170 pounds. He has dark hair, brown eyes, and a mustache, end quote. Did you just get a little bit of deja vu when I gave you that description?
A little bit. My only thing is like the big descriptors are similar.
Yes.
People
the generic
can see,
descriptors.
Right. People can see different color eyes, or they can, maybe they didn't really see it, so their brain's filling in what they didn't really notice at the time.
Yeah.
You have this dark upper lip in the first sketch.
Yes, exactly.
That we could have thought was a mustache if you look at the picture from without blowing it up.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like these are the same people. Dark complexion, similar age group, similar height, similar weight.
Yes. All right. So I'm going to send you the sketch right now. And for everybody listening, again, this will also be on our socials and our website.
Oh, yeah.
Is that the same guy?
What did I say about you can't tell about the bridge of the nose and like the unibrow type looking thing?
Yeah.
This looks like the guy on the second guy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he looks like... I always think, like, if there is a descriptor or a type of thing where, like, when people look a certain way, they look like Pablo Escobar. This guy looks like Pablo Escobar.
Does everybody look like Pablo Escobar?
No, he's got, like, kind of Spanish features, and then he's got a mustache, and he's got the hair.
Yeah, but when you look at these, like,
they
side
could be
by
the same
side,
person.
this looks like, this could be just, like, somebody's take on what this guy looked like.
Absolutely.
And the dark lip thing really gets me, where I'm like, was this a thin mustache? And you always talk about, too, like, sketch artists taking liberties, where it's like he had a darker upper lip or whatever, and, like, in reality, could that have been a mustache? Or, like, they say, oh, he had a thin mustache, but then they take a liberty to make it a little bit thicker, or...
But at the bridge of the nose...
Yeah.
There is a dark shadow or hair on both of them, which is very distinct when you're just describing a person.
It just looks like the second sketch is of the first guy just after he got out of bed.
Disheveled.
Exactly.
Right. Or after he was in a scuffle with somebody.
Yeah. Like, that's what that looks like to me. This looks like the same guy.
I agree.
Okay. I'm glad we're on the same page.
And
I knew we would be, but,
But the fact that this second sketch was given by people that saw this guy in the area
Yeah.
of where Sherry's car was found.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, you know, how accurate do you think that really could be? Because, like I said, it's like the middle of the night, whatever. But then to have that Sears employee give this description, and it essentially match the description of this guy that was seen in the middle of the night in the area where Sherry's car was found, that's pretty wild.
Yeah, and for it to look that similar, of course, like, there probably wasn't great lighting. There was snow. They could have misconstrued that he had a mustache. He might not have. Like,
right,
I think no matter what, like, at the end of the day, this is the same freaking guy.
Absolutely. Dark complexion. One person says 5'9", the other says 5'10". One person says 160, the other person says 170.
Exactly. It's negligible.
It's the same person.
Yeah. Well, so then my other thought on this, too, is, like, are authorities just saying, like, oh, he could be a potential witness because they want him to come forward, even though in their heads they're like, you're the credit card stealing guy, but we're just going to pretend like you're a disabled motorist that probably maybe saw something in the area and we just want your input.
Well, if he is involved in the potential murder of Sherry, no matter what they say, he's not going to come forward with information.
No shit.
But if he has coworkers or if he has friends in the area and they identify him and they're just like, oh, I'm going to call police and say, hey, you know, that's Joe Schmo. If that's him and somebody else outs him because they want to be, you know, you there's a sense of fulfillment in yourself, like when you have information and you provide information to police or to somebody that's looking for information. It's like you feel good about it. So they could have just called and outed this guy. Not knowing that he's actually a suspect because they say, oh, he might have information. He might have been a witness.
Yep.
So that's a good tactic.
Definitely. So authorities did get some calls about the men depicted in these sketches, if it really even is two men, which I don't think it is, but... Yes, the man depicted in these sketches. But those leads hadn't really led anywhere as of yet. So over the next couple of months, a few things trickled out in the media regarding Sherry's case, but the most important one is, again, that it's believed that Sherry was murdered. And the following statement was reported in the News Journal. Quote, based on the evidence, there are indications of a brutal crime. The evidence so far indicates a non-survivable crime, end quote.
All right, well, that's more solidifying in, like, what they found in the car.
Yes, so you're considering there's probably a significant amount of blood. There is human tissue to the point where, like, maybe she was beaten. Like, you know,
well, when I think of human tissue, at least, I'm thinking, like, a chunk.
Yes, that's what I think of, too,
like, whether it be brain matter, whether it be, you know, a chunk of, like, fat. Like, I think of, you know, if somebody got cut and, like, something was lopped off, essentially.
Yeah, I think, like, if you are hit with something that is very sharp on the end.
I'm thinking you can pick this piece of evidence up with tweezers.
Yes, not like blood where it's a liquid.
Right.
Yes, I agree. Also, during this several-month time frame, Sherry's coworkers had put together a group that went by the name Friends of Sheree Magaro, and they'd worked to gather roughly $20,000 to offer as a reward for information in her disappearance. Also around this same time, authorities had gotten the testing back from the blood samples that were taken from the car, and it was stated that they did in fact match Sherry's blood type. And not only that, the blood on the shirt that was discovered near the scene, remember that plaid shirt that we talked about before that was drenched in blood, was found to also be a match to Sherry's blood type.
Interesting.
But remember, this is 1987. So DNA was like super in its infancy, and authorities only believed it to belong to Sherry because the blood type matched hers. It's not like they were really able to do any DNA testing to, you know, definitively confirm,
Did she have a common blood type?
Well, when I was researching this, I thought, this is weird. How can they be sure it's her blood? Not that I didn't agree with, you know, the findings, but I was curious about the testing, how it all worked, and it was a question I had in my notes from the beginning. An article in the Philadelphia Inquirer had described how investigators and forensic analysts were even able to get an idea of Sherry's blood type in the first place, because apparently they didn't have it or know what it was.
I guess she wasn't a blood donor.
Probably not. Chuck Jackson yet again gave a comment, and it stated, quote, he said crime laboratory technicians had obtained blood samples from her family members in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, and used them to determine what blood type she had. End quote. But again, I was still not quite understanding how they came to this determination with just blood samples, not DNA. Like, come on, I want more here. Like all this blood typing stuff and all that.
It's not like all family members have the same blood type.
Of course not. But then I found Ted Caddell's reporting for the morning news, which I have mentioned a couple times already in this episode. But I gotta tell you, this guy did some seriously awesome reporting on this case. And
so he's like the Bob Ward of Maryland.
Yes, that's what it felt like. He cleared up so much for me when I was researching this case. So his article stated the following in terms of the blood evidence. Quote, using blood samples provided by Mary Grace and Thomas Utes, technicians compared the enzymes and DNA molecules. According to the lab technicians, chances were extremely good. 41,891,827 to 1, in fact, that whoever shed the blood found in the car was a child of the Uteses, end quote.
Okay. So you're saying there's a chance it wasn't? I'm just kidding. But yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
So I mean,
he
dug deep there. He got into the, more nitty-gritty of it. Like you're comparing enzymes. You're still looking at DNA moleculs to try and match
no scientist, all right?
No, but
if it's like 42 million or something to 1.
You're like, okay, so
right.
That goes back to what you said earlier about, well, did Sheree harm her attacker? Or was it the other way around? So now I think we've gotten to the point where now we know this is Sheree's blood, 42 million to 1, and there, again, just seems like there was no way for her to survive this attack.
Mm-hmm. Any idea of a weapon or anything yet?
Let's keep going. Also, something else that came out around this time frame that I wanted to mention was in terms of evidence and where it's stored and what authorities might do with it. So, it's reported that Sheree's car had been brought in for testing nearly immediately after it was found, like I had talked about earlier, but it was later stripped, and I'm assuming that means stripped of all the evidence investigators might need. But then they apparently sold the rest of her vehicle for scrap. I was kind of shocked by this statement, and it made me want to ask you, John, why wouldn't authorities have kept the whole car? It's surprising to me that they might not need certain parts of it for trial or something later on down the line if it came to that. Why would you risk getting rid of the whole thing and only keeping the things that you think you need when you might actually need something different later? Do you think they just kept the seats and other pieces of the car that might have had evidence on it, then got rid of the rest?
I don't know. That doesn't make sense. I mean, you would think that you just keep the car intact the way it is.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm wouldn't it be in an impound lot? Why are you selling pieces of the car?
Well, when they said stripped, I didn't think of stripped of evidence. I thought they tore this thing apart looking for more evidence.
Okay.
And then maybe once it's all torn apart, you ain't putting it back together. Mm-hmm. So maybe they kept the pieces of the vehicle that had evidence, and then they just got rid of the rest of it because what are you going to do? You're going to keep a torn apart car? And yes, DNA wasn't really a thing at this time, or, touch DNA or sweat DNA wasn't really a thing. So it's very easy to overlook, a vent that somebody could have sweat on or sneezed on.
Yeah.
You would never know that there's even DNA to look for on there.
Yeah.
So, again, not trying to justify what they did, but I assume by you saying that they stripped it, they probably tore it down looking for more evidence.
Yeah.
When they didn't find it, they only kept the pieces that they knew had evidence on it, got rid of the rest. Was it a good idea? Probably not.
Okay, well, it makes sense. It just sucks.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. All right, so at this point, I want to go back to Ted Caddell's piece in the morning news that I mentioned before, and his article came out in September of 1987, so roughly 7 months after Sheree disappeared. But like I said before, this really cleared up a lot of things, and there were so many little nuggets in there that really helped to clarify some of the other facts that we have little pieces of so far. And I think you're going to be very interested, John, in hearing what we've got going forward here. You've had some questions, and I think I might answer them.
All right.
So I want to kind of work through several pieces of info that were revealed from his very in-depth reporting. A lot of it we did know little teeny tiny tidbits of, but now we're going to get into those nitty-gritty details that might help in terms of investigators, analysis of the case, and then also just what we're thinking about it as we're talking about it. So first of all, we had talked earlier about the fact that there was blood and human tissue found in Sheree's car. We'll come to find out the tissue that was found was actually brain matter.
That's what I was thinking.
Not only that, a skull fragment had also been located on the door of Sheree's Ford Torino.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there were no signs of blood outside of the car, like in the snow or anything like that, like around the area, at least based on what I've been able to find. But I don't think that necessarily means that it wasn't just concealed by all the snow in the area. Like you were saying before, could it have melted along with the snow into the ground and you might not have found it, right?
Right.
But authorities did believe that Sheree was attacked in her car and then her body taken elsewhere. There was this quote that was mentioned too that I do want to read for you that I'm like a little bit confused about what it might mean, so I want to kind of see what you're thinking. It stated, quote, "There would have been an astronomical amount of blood. It just wasn't there," end quote.
Well, it was on the shirt that was drenched in blood.
Yeah, and it was also in the car, but what I'm thinking, it seemed like, at least based on the context of like where this was included in the article, was this in terms of outside the car? Did they think like if she had been moved or dragged somewhere or taken to another car that there would have been so much blood there, but they couldn't find that?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, that's what it seems like. It's like there should have been more blood, but there wasn't. But there was blood on the outside of the car.
Correct.
So, yeah, I mean, it could have happened somewhere and then the body taken somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
If the attack happened fast.
Yep.
And, you know, say somebody planned to attack the driver and then use the vehicle as a getaway vehicle later, or at least move the vehicle somewhere else later. You may perform the attack. Once the person or your victim is incapacitated, you move as quickly as possible to get them out of the driver's seat, because you really want to drive in a vehicle that's, or in a driver's seat that's covered in blood.
No.
So,
but it seemed like a lot of the blood and everything was in the back. I'm not entirely sure if it was in the front. I feel like just based on like what I've read that it was in the back seat, especially because that's where the fire was started as well. Like that's where you wanted to get the majority of the evidence destroyed.
I don't know. I mean, it's obviously a head wound. What could the weapon have been? A blunt object, a hammer, something easily concealable that, you know, Sheree would have allowed somebody into her vehicle unbeknownst to her that they were carrying a weapon.
Yeah, but so what I'm trying to like nail down more is like why there wouldn't have been so much blood outside of the car. So like we're going to talk more again about the inside of the car later. Don't worry.
Yeah,
there's a lot.
It could have melted with the snow, gone into the dirt.
But let's say that's not what happened. So what I'm thinking is that she was attacked and killed in her car. That's what it seems like. And then maybe transferred into another vehicle that was like pulled up right next to it. Or I'm thinking that maybe she was moved from the car before it was ever put in the field in the first place. Like, could this have happened on the side of the road? If it was happening in the car, it's heavily snowing. People probably aren't paying attention to what's happening on the side of the road. Could the attack have happened that way? Transferred her to a vehicle that was still along the side of the road, and then they drove the car as far as they could into the field to dump it there, and then moved along.
I think logistically that'd be difficult. Like you're saying that this person had their own vehicle already there. They got in her vehicle. They attacked her in her vehicle. Then they took her out of her vehicle, put them in theirs, then got back into her car, drove it into the field, and then left.
Well, yeah, but I'm thinking along the lines of what you said before of a disabled motorist, and then knowing that there was the disabled motorist that was seen in the area. Like, would she have stopped to help this person, and she was right behind their car, and then whatever happened, and, you know?
Yeah, no, I think definitely could have happened that way.
There's still so much more. So, what I'm about to tell you next answers a question that you had for me. And I feel like a lot of the questions that I had are very similar to the questions that you have. And Ted Cadell, man, he is coming in clutch here. Yeah, with some answers. So you had asked me before about the shirt that was found. Could it have been Sheree's? Could it have been her fiancé's? You know, whatever. Well, we find out a little bit more. In this article, it stated, quote, "The crime lab determined that it was soaked with Magaro's blood. There's no indication it was Magaro's shirt," Perot said. "A man's large, 16.5 neck, made in Hong Kong, no special label," he said. "Any Kmart, Dollar General store has them," end quote. So now you know that it wasn't hers. You know the size of the shirt. It was a large. It had a 16.5-inch neck. And you can literally buy it anywhere. No, that doesn't help to nail anything down.
In my opinion, it doesn't help nail down, but it helps me start to formulate. You gave me this little bit of information. Now I'm thinking, okay, I can get in line with what you were saying where she thought it was a disabled motor vehicle. Whatever attack happened, the suspect, if it's this guy,
was seen in the area.
That was seen in the area, would have had to move her. If she was bleeding heavily, there would have been a lot of blood on his shirt. And if he's leaving and driving down the same road, rip that shirt off,
then it's found
throw it
just
out the
further
car.
up the road. It was found near the Bohemia River Bridge, 2.5 miles up the road.
Throw it out the car while you're driving because you don't want to be drenched in blood.
Yep.
And I don't know how the river flows in the winter. I don't know if it's cold enough there to where the river would freeze or have ice over it. So if something was thrown in there, it could have floated downriver then and into a larger body of water.
Yeah, definitely possible. So something that I was thinking, like as we're talking, and I kind of have this laid out a little bit, has to do with what we kind of just mentioned about, you know, whoever did this throwing the blood-soaked shirt out of the car. And I'm wondering why they would have even considered doing this, just knowing everything that we know so far. They're taking her body. They're trying to destroy evidence. And I just can't really wrap my brain around why they would willingly leave evidence like that. The biggest question, it seems, is like, why would this person take Sheree's body? There has to be something, like there has to be a reason why they took her body. And I think it's important, and I mean, at least where I'm at right now is in terms of hiding evidence, whether they buried her body somewhere. Why would they be so careless with a shirt then if they've tried to be as good as they can be about destroying evidence?
I mean, I think it always comes down to, like, in lack of evidence, the easiest answer is most likely the best answer or the most accurate answer.
Yeah. Is there a name for that? It's not Occam's razor, Hammurabi's code, all these ones that you've taught me.
Occam's razor.
It is Occam's razor? Okay.
Yeah.
Look at me remembering things.
Yeah, so, I mean, I would say it's a lapse in judgment. He's drenched in blood.
Yep.
He's driving his vehicle. He's like, oh, I got to get this off, and just, you know, takes it off and chucks it out the window.
Yeah. But then I think about, like, are you going to change into something? If you're a long-haul truck driver, you might have something to change into.
Yeah.
All right, well, so now that we're kind of like theorizing on things a little bit, I do want to bring up some of the theories in this case and break down what was actually reported regarding them, because I'll tell you, some of these theories were talked about in the media. Authorities came out with some of their thoughts on theories, and
I have to assume Frank and Michael are totally out of this.
They were looked into and they were both vetted. They are not, as of today, considered suspects.
Right.
So back to the theories that were reported on, kind of what authorities were thinking, all that. So at one point, there were rumors that maybe Sheree had picked up a hitchhiker.
You don't say.
Yeah, I know. When you said that at the beginning, I was like...
Well, I mean, it's you put two and two together. It's a bad night.
Yeah.
She turns up missing or dead.
Yep.
You got to think, oh, maybe she picked up a hitchhiker. It's an easy way for somebody that wants to do harm to somebody else to, like, set somebody up. It's like, oh, I've been watching the weather. There's going to be a bad storm. I'm going to stop on this road, and I'm going to act like I'm a disabled motorist. Somebody's going to stop eventually.
Yeah.
And that'll be my target.
Yes, I totally agree with what you're saying, and I think it's not something that's out of the realm of possibility, especially back in 87. Everyone was hitchhiking.
Yeah, I mean, even today, it's still a possibility.
Yeah.
You may have
not
1,000...
as common, though.
Right, but you may have 1,000 cars pass you, but somebody will stop for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of her coworkers actually said that, like the people that she worked with at Control Data, they said that there was no way that she ever would have picked up a hitchhiker and that she seemed to be pretty safety conscious. A comment from one of her friends was reported on in the News Journal. It stated, quote, "She was very consistent and was even careful about locking her car doors," end quote. However, on the other side of the coin, her mother believed that she may have considered picking up a hitchhiker. Mary Grace told the Cecil Whig, quote, "She would have given anyone a ride. She would have pitied them," end quote.
Well, if she would have pitied them, she really would have pitied them
in a snowstorm,
in the middle of a snowstorm.
Yeah. But Regardless of if Sheree actually would have picked someone up or not, the prevailing theory, at least back in the early days of the investigation, was not that she picked up a hitchhiker per se, but more likely that she stopped on the side of the road to help someone. Maybe even a...
disabled motorist.
Yes.
Bingo.
So, for me, this theory makes the most sense for a couple reasons. First of all, way earlier on, I had mentioned the road that Sheree's car was found on was pretty rural. It was like more of a truck route, that kind of thing. So you'd have to think that it might not have been plowed as regularly as a more main road. So she could have totally stopped to help someone who was struggling in the snow. Authorities also don't believe that she could have broken down and stopped on the side of the road and waited for help. Because when they brought her car in for testing after it had been found, it was determined that it was functioning perfectly. Didn't seem to have any issues at all and still had gas in the tank.
I was going to ask that. How much gas was it? Did she stop and just recently fill it?
No. So she had roughly a quarter tank or about 7 gallons of gas left in the tank.
Was there a gas station nearby that she had just stopped at to gas up?
I mean, $20 back in the day would get you a lot of gas.
I know.
Today,
I probably would have filled your gas.
Not so much. So probably not if I had to take a guess.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying is, if she had a quarter of a tank, did she just stop to gas up?
Mm-hmm.
And before she was capable or before she was able to do that, did somebody get her? I think that's not likely
Oh,
at
I
all,
see what you're saying. Yeah, no, I don't think so. I'm still going along the lines of it's like this disabled motorist guy that we have the sketch of.
First thing that popped into my head, that's the way it goes.
Yeah. And I think this theory seems to be the most likely because it also kind of aligns really well with that guy that tried to use the credit card, a.k.a. also the disabled motorist, because that's what we're freaking thinking. But investigators did later say that they believed the lead they got about the man who attempted to use the credit card was the, quote, most promising lead they'd gotten in Sheree's case. A comment made regarding credit card guy by investigators stated, quote, the man with the card knew an awful lot about Aberdeen, he said. That day, the base was closed until noon. In addition, the Sheridan on Maryland 22 is where APG puts them up, end quote. The man was also said to have a military-style haircut, which I think coincides with the first sketch that we looked at, like the guy that actually had the nice, neat, tidy hair.
Mm-hmm. What's APG?
So that's Aberdeen Proving Ground, which is a military base.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so this guy knew this stuff. He's saying, he's giving this excuse of oh, it's my wife's card. Obviously, Sheree's not his wife, but
right when you get put on the spot, you resort to something you know.
Oh my God, John! Stop! Literally, I wrote this in and I was like, I wonder if he's gonna know what I'm trying to say here. But I said, I think this guy is telling a story that had truth to it because if you're gonna tell a lie, you're going to try and keep as much of it as close to the truth as possible to make it seem more legitimate, right?
You know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. I'm I don't know what that saying is, but that's what he's doing. That's what I feel like he's doing.
Yeah, like I said, when you're put on the spot and you have to lie about something, you're going to try and add in something that you know a lot about.
Yes.
Or something that you're familiar with, because if somebody calls you out on, they're already calling you out on something. If you give them a line of bullshit and it just so happens that they know about it.
Yeah.
Now you've been called out twice and there's even more suspicion on you. So generally you're going to be like, oh yeah, talk about something that you do know.
Yeah.
To try and cover your ass.
Exactly. And one last thing about this whole situation with credit card guy, disabled motorist guy, probably being the same guy, but I want to mention that authorities did go down to that Aberdeen Proving Ground, the military base, to try and see if they could locate the man in question. But it was really funny when I was reading this article. They said that when they walked in there, every dude looked the same. And they all looked like the sketch they had. Yeah. So it was difficult to determine, if any of them, could have been this guy.
I mean, there are ways. It's a lot of legwork and a lot of fucking elbow grease, but it's the weekend.
But if you're trying to walk in there and just be like, that's the guy, you're not going to do that.
But, it's the weekend. It's about to be Monday morning. You should be back at the barracks before a certain time on a Sunday night to make sure that you're there the next morning. You go through, you talk to people, oh, was so-and-so, in the bunks at this time?
Yeah.
There are ways to do it, but if they didn't, I guess I kind of understand if everybody looked the same.
Or they did and maybe nothing came of it, so they just didn't talk about it to the press. I mean, that's
it also could have been somebody that's no longer there.
Well, okay, so...
Somebody that was discharged.
Can you cut that out? right now, like, cut it out, literally.
Yeah.
Next thing that was about to come out of my mouth is the fact that, like, what if he lived there before? What if he was, active duty at one point?
Mm-hmm.
And then, he got discharged, whatever. He's now a civilian. He's not living on the base, but because he was close to this area, he's like, oh, yeah, I used to live at Aberdeen Proving Ground. So I'll just tell this guy with the credit card that. Still keeps it close to the truth, even though it's not him presently living there. But
perfect.
I just thought that.
Yeah.
Get out of my head. All right. So the whole timeline of this guy using the card, the fact that he looks just like the guy that was seen in the area the night before, and then everything else we have so far really just makes it seem like this guy's probably involved. Like, at least in my mind, I think he's involved. But
oh, he has to be, if not the guy that killed her.
Okay, well, what I'm about to tell you kind of lends even more credence to this whole theory, especially if our listeners are of the same mindset that we are, that these guys are one and the same. So there was additional information that came out about the disabled motorist that was seen in the same area, and that information has to do with when he was seen and who the witnesses were that saw him. Several witnesses had said that they saw him that night when they were passing by the area, which makes me wonder if Sheree could have been kind of a witness just like these people, but unlike some of the others that drove by, she decided to stop and help.
Right.
But before I get ahead of myself, I do want to mention that investigators believed that this man's potentially disabled vehicle was in the area between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. that night, which, yet again, coincides with the timeline regarding when Sheree left her fiancé's house and when authorities believed her car was placed in the field due to the amount of snow underneath it. It all matches up pretty perfectly, right?
Right, and what are the odds that somebody sees this guy there at that time and then this guy is later using her credit card somewhere?
Exactly. So I'm sure you're probably wondering, how were authorities able to nail down the timeline? Well, obviously that comes from multiple witness statements. One witness statement, I guess multiple witness statement, came from several men that were traveling in the area together. There's a comment regarding what those men saw. Quote, "At 10 p.m., a carload of men headed south on the road stopped for a man flagging them down, but the man refused their offer of assistance."
Because he was looking for somebody to attack.
Stop it! This was the thing that I told you about earlier, that when I was first researching this case, I literally just had this flagged in my notes as something that I wanted to discuss. And I was like, what is the point of flagging these guys down then? And I didn't really know what the answer would have been until I was writing this script, and then like the wheels in my brain started turning, and I'm like,
because this guy wouldn't know how many people are in the vehicle until they stop.
Exactly.
Then he sees them and he's
like, there's like 4 dudes in this car. Nah, I'm looking for an unsuspecting woman that I can overpower. That's who he's looking for. That's why he sent them on their way. So I was like, wow, that's
this was
wild.
pre-planned, right?
Kind of, yes. Not like Sheree in particular, but just anyone in particular that would stop for him.
Like I said, just as it could happen now, eventually your victim that you're going to select will stop for you.
Yes.
No matter how long it takes.
Even in the middle of a snowstorm. So after this, apparently even a police officer had stopped at one point and checked out this car, but it didn't seem like anyone was with it. It's unclear exactly what time the officer saw the vehicle, but it was between that 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. time frame. And I truly wonder what could have been going on with Sheree and her killer at that time. Like, was he hiding or waiting for like this cop to leave? Like, if his car is still there, and we're of the mindset that this person with this disabled vehicle, supposedly disabled vehicle, is there, what is happening? Was she already hurt?
Could she have, let's say it was prior. Back in the day when it was like, when cops drove Crown Vics and stuff, you could tell by the headlights that it was a cop coming.
Yeah.
So this guy probably saw or noticed that it was a cop coming or a vehicle similar to that. So he very well might have hid. But I do wonder, because we don't know the exact timeline of what happened with Sheree.
Did the cop see it before she had even stopped?
It could have been right before she stopped.
Ugh, that would suck. But there was another sighting of this car in the area, and this one was from a plow driver, or a plow truck driver, whatever you want to call it. But this person saw the car there at approximately 1 a.m. But then when either the cop or the plow driver, I'm really not sure which, but whenever they came back to the area around 1:30 in the morning, the stranded motorist car was just gone. So you have to assume then probably within that 1 a.m. to 1:30 time frame is when whoever's car this was took it and left the area, right?
Yeah, I would assume so. It's tough to say, too, like, say this plow driver's driving by.
Uh-huh.
You know, you're focused on plowing the road.
Yes.
This other vehicle is parked right on the roadway. You're making sure that you're not hitting it. You're keeping an eye out. You're saying, oh, I see that. But who knows? Sherry's car could have been in the field at that point.
Yeah.
And because he's so focused on, not hitting this other car while he's plowing and
not paying attention to those things.
That, and if it's 1 o'clock in the morning, 1:30 in the morning, you're not seeing this vehicle that's all the way off in the distance, 100 feet into the field.
Yeah.
So
I gotta say 2 things. 1, I am impressed by the amount of witnesses that did pay attention and that did have something to say, especially in the middle of a snowstorm like that. Because I can say if it were me, like I am like white knuckling the steering wheel, paying attention directly in front of me. I'm not looking out the sides of the windows. I probably wouldn't be able to tell you shit if I were driving down that road. So I am impressed by all these people. But
yeah, I guess. But you say that, but also you're very observant when things are out of place or when something's not, as it should be.
Yeah, I guess. I'm always that person. Like if you pick your nose and you don't want anyone to see it, I'm going to see it. Like 100% I'm going to see it. But the other thing I was, right? But the other thing I was going to say too is I'm really surprised you haven't asked me what kind of car this was yet.
Well, we had talked about it earlier. I'm thinking like, pickup truck, but what kind of vehicle was it, Brittany?
Well, it ain't, John. It's not a pickup truck. So several of the witnesses were able to describe the kind of car it may have been. And it seems like the general consensus is that it was a Ford Mustang.
Interesting.
Which is really funny to me because I was literally just finishing up writing this before we recorded, and then we went on a walk around our neighborhood, and there was literally this guy driving a Mustang.
And you were like, what is that?
Like, is it the guy? Like, it was just really weird that happened that way.
Funny.
But
it was an old Mustang. It was like a 60s,
yeah,
70s
definitely
Mustang,
an older Mustang.
So.
But it's unclear what color the one in our story was, and honestly, that hasn't been reported, so I'm kind of surprised. Like, we don't know what color it was.
But like you were saying earlier, you were thinking, it was probably a vehicle that was good in the snow.
Ford Mustang ain't good in the snow.
Good in the snow, right?
Yeah, so that's weird,
Unless it
right?
had chains.
Maybe.
If it had chains or something like that on the tires. Maybe.
Yeah. Well,
which, if this was planned, it probably did.
Also true, yeah. I'm also not sure what year the car was, but apparently it did have what was described as like specifically shaped amber flashers, which I think means tail lights, but I guess that was like a helpful...
Well, flashers would be like turn signals.
Oh, well, I mean, that's a part of your tail light, isn't it?
Yeah, it's turn signals or like your hazards.
Okay,
hazards would be your flashers.
So they were amber colored, and there was like this particular shape to it that, I guess, only Ford Mustangs between 1974 and 1978, as well as 1983 to 1987 had. So... at least there's like some sort of indication for authorities to kind of nail down a little bit on the year at least.
Yeah.
But if they don't have the color or, anything like that, it's a little bit tougher. But so I had talked before about the cop that stopped to check on the car. Well, he actually moved forward with hypnosis to try and remember more details about the vehicle. But all he was able to pull from the depths of his brain was that it had Maryland license plates. However, more recently, I've seen it reported that the plates were from Pennsylvania, so that's certainly not very helpful. But back in the day, though, investigators did search Maryland registration records, but didn't seem to have found anything of note. Also, something else interesting that happened that I hadn't mentioned before was that in May of 1987, some litter or trash cleanup crew had found another one of Sherry's credit cards. This one in particular was a JCPenney store credit card, and it was found leaning against a stop sign along Route 213, which, again, same road her car was found on, but this was found, meaning the credit card, was found roughly 8 miles up the road along Whitehall Road near U.S. Route 40. Authorities stated the following regarding how the credit card could have made its way there. Quote, "It could have blown there, it could have been there all along, or somebody could have tossed it out the window the day before," end quote.
They didn't give a solidified answer. They said, it could have gone there anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is what I was thinking. It's like, when you think laid up against a stop sign, it's not like somebody went there and placed it there as a piece of evidence. It's like,
imagine though, they were
up there somehow.
This is exactly how I want this to be found.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it could be, but probably not likely.
Right.
Alrighty, so at this point, roughly 7 or 8 months into the investigation and search for Sheree Magaro, authorities had no suspects in mind other than the man who used the credit card, but Of course, they didn't know who he was or really anything about him, so he was not officially named as a suspect. And John had asked earlier about Sheree's ex-husband, Michael, and her fiancé, Frank, and if they were looked into, and it seems like they were ruled out as they were very cooperative in terms of authorities' investigation. So moving forward a bit in the timeline, around March of 1989, Sheree's mother had petitioned the court to legally declare her daughter deceased. And by the beginning of May that same year, the judge did in fact declare Sheree Magaro legally dead. After this, the Utes family held a memorial service for Sheree, but it wasn't the same as being able to give her a proper burial. The family was also planning to purchase a cemetery plot and put up a tombstone for her, even though her body still hadn't been located. Mary Grace told the News Journal, quote, "Even if she's not there, Toni needs a place to go, to know that she might be there, because she did walk this earth, and she deserves to be remembered," end quote.
This may sound callous, but was anybody ever paid out any type of insurance settlement?
I don't think so. I didn't see anything about any insurance money.
Okay, so that person that called all these news stations and police departments and everything probably was crazy.
Probably. After approximately 3 years of really nothing in Sheree's case, authorities stated that they were really struggling. They relayed some of the theories that continued to be discussed, but there didn't really seem to be any concrete evidence to back any of them up. State Trooper Robert Perot told the News Journal, quote, "There are theories. It was a domestic-related killing. It was a serial killer. It was somebody impersonating a police officer. But we just don't know. There's so many things in this case we just don't know. And that's unusual. There's usually something to go on. There's usually a body, for one thing," end quote. So we had talked before about a few of these theories, but there are still so many things that were unclear that made investigators question everything. There was no indication of why Sheree might have stopped on the side of the road. Of course, we can speculate, but again, there's nothing really concrete to say why. Then there's the fact that we don't know if she was sexually assaulted, the fact that we don't know if she was beaten or shot or stabbed, the fact that we don't know exactly how she was killed or if she fought her attacker. These are all things that just made it more and more difficult for authorities to put a feather in their cap about any of them. I will say, though, even though it's not confirmed 100%, Sheree's cause of death, her official cause of death, was classified as blunt force trauma. I think that was probably confirmed because of the fact that there was brain matter found in the car and the skull fragment found as well. I don't believe any bullet casings or anything like that were located, so blunt force trauma does seem to make the most sense.
Yeah, I mean, all the evidence that was within the vehicle leads you to believe that. It seems like she was struck in the head with something like a hammer or something that's, blunt enough and heavy enough or
sharp enough. Yeah.
To cause a skull fracture, massive blood loss.
Yep. Also, in terms of additional evidence found, there was a partial bloody fingerprint as well as a palm print found in Sheree's car, but unfortunately, Sheree herself had never been fingerprinted, so it was totally unclear if those prints found were her own or someone else's.
I would assume that they were probably her own, and the reason I say that is because if this person had planned this, they were out in a snowstorm, they probably had gloves on.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
I mean, it's fucking cold out. It's snowing.
Mm-hmm.
They're planning on killing someone. If that's
what it seems
happened.
like. I highly doubt this was not at least somewhat pre-planned thing.
Right. They're probably wearing gloves.
Yeah. Something else that was mentioned in regards to additional evidence found and what investigators believed may have happened was in terms of what the killer did with Sheree's car. Quote, "As the theory goes, the killer or killers drove the car to the field, set it afire to destroy evidence, and fled," end quote. It continues, quote, "No strange fingerprints were found. Musil confirmed that investigators found an instrument that may have been used in the attack, but declined to say what it is," end quote. And as of today, there still hasn't been any indication from investigators as to what that weapon may have been. The last official, in-depth article I found on this case was from the Cecil Whig in 2004, which was nearly 20 years ago now. At that point, there were still no clues as to where Sheree's body may be or who could have done this to her. It was mentioned in that article that her ex-husband had been looked into at one point as a suspect, especially considering Sheree had full custody of their son. Michael had been interviewed at one point as well, but he mentioned that the couple split on, quote, "good terms," and that he was nearly 100 miles away from where she went missing, like where she went missing from on the night that she disappeared. The Cecil Whig reported on a statement from one of the investigators on the case regarding their investigation of the ex-husband's potential involvement. He stated, quote, "They had the normal divorce and custody problems. We looked at the ex-husband very hard, but nothing ever came from it," end quote. I haven't seen anything in regards to the fiancé, though. I don't know if authorities looked into him the same way they did the ex-husband, and I also don't believe he's talked to anyone in the media, and the Cecil Whig did state that they tried to get in touch with him for their piece covering Sheree's case, but were unsuccessful in their efforts.
I mean, as far as Michael goes, if he had been tracking Sheree's movements and knew that when she went down to visit Frank, she usually left on Monday morning, how would he know that she left that Sunday night? How would he know to be waiting there?
Yeah.
It's
not like
find
my friends on whatever apps
right.
you have today where
or
you can
throwing
be like,
a friggin' Apple
here.
tag in somebody's car.
Yeah, exactly. Very
them.
different back in 87, but
yeah, so I wanted to get it out there and ask if that was the case, but it wasn't my first instinct to begin with. But you always have to rule out, the people closest to
absolutely
the victim at the time of her death. So.
And I think it's always interesting when we get into this too, because like there are some cases where I think there's no way it could be somebody close to her or to the victim in the case. And then, sometimes you'll bring it up and you'll give really good points about it. Like, even though it's stated in all these things like, oh, so-and-so was looked into, they've been ruled out, blah, 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 blah. But then you give good reasons as to maybe why they could have been involved. This one from the start, I always thought, like, as uncommon as it is, I really thought this was a stranger who did this. Like, it just did not come into my brain that it would have been either the ex or her fiance. So at this point, there was some additional information about the witness sightings of this stranded motorist. It was stated that some of the witnesses had even seen someone matching Sheree's description speaking to said stranded individual. Also around this same time, authorities did state that they do believe that the sketches provided of the two men are more than likely the same man.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
I mean, if we're thinking that now and we're not the investigators that are deep within this thing,
yeah,
you know that they're thinking it.
Absolutely. But outside of this Cecil Whig article that I found from 2004, I've only seen Reddit threads, web sleuth threads, and a handful of other podcasts and YouTubers cover this case in the past 2 decades. So I want to dive into some other theories in this case and then wrap up with the questions that we're left with segment. All in all, it appears that there were a few theories in this case. We've gone through them numerous times throughout, but one of the ones we talked about pretty heavily was the fact that somebody got her to pull over on the side of the road somehow to help them. Another was the fact that this could have been domestic related with either the ex-husband or the fiancé being involved, but I think we kind of ruled that one out. But lastly, one that we haven't dove into too much is that it could have been a serial killer. And maybe they stumbled upon a vulnerable woman, potentially she was even stuck in the snow, and they took the opportunity to strike. And the reason why I want to dive into this one a little more is that there was actually a serial killer who was active very close to this area pretty much right around the same time. And that serial killer was Stephen Brian Pennell. I think it's pronounced Pennell. And I think most people know him as just Brian Pennell, not Stephen Brian. So we'll just call him Brian moving forward. So he was known as the Route 40 killer. And I don't know if you caught it earlier, but that credit card that was found was along the lines of, or along the streets of Whitehall Road and US Route 40.
Okay.
So that was about 8 miles up the road. And
same time period too?
Same time period. Two of his victims his first victim was killed in 1987, and then he had several others in 1988. And Route 40, pretty much intersects with Route 213, and it's only probably 16 miles from the Bohemia River and the Bohemia River Bridge. And then knowing that Sheree's car was found 2 miles south of that, Route 40 was literally less than 20 miles from where her car was found. And he was active in Delaware, but where this bridge is and the location and all of that, it's right on the state line. You're very, very close to it. So you can't rule out the fact that maybe he crossed state lines to commit these crimes, right?
Yeah, possibility.
So he's active in the 80s. Several victims killed, 87, 88. The biggest difference, I'll say, is that his victims were sex workers, but a lot of people have said, and they've speculated, did he just decide to do this because she kind of wound up in his clutches unsuspectingly? Like, was he planning something? Like, serial killers are the type that are going to go out and have this set up and ready to go. Like, the Ted Bundys of the world, like, they are out hunting, as awful as that is to say like that. Like, that's what they're doing. And then the other thing about him is that he also killed his victims with blunt force trauma. And I have seen it mentioned here and there that a weapon of choice was a hammer, which is something that you brought up earlier, especially considering brain matter and a skull fragment. The end of a hammer, like the end that you like pull the nails out with, that could definitely...
Any end of the hammer.
Yeah.
Could do a lot of damage. Is there any type of cross-reference between what type of vehicle that he drove on the regular?
He drove a van, and it seemed as though that was like his car that he used when he would abduct his victims. And he did, I'm pretty sure, I didn't do like a huge deep dive into him, but he would torture his victims beforehand. Like he was like fucked in the head.
I just pulled him up on Wikipedia, and when you look at his image, like his mugshot, it does look kind of similar to the first sketch that you sent me.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because I was going to send you the sketch and do kind of like a side-by-side. Like you can see his side profile, which we didn't have in the sketches, but then when you look at the front of his face, you can see, like, I think he's a little heavier. I think he might be a little shorter, if I'm correct.
Yep.
So it's not like a perfect match to the height and weight, but he has dark hair. I don't know if he ever sported a mustache at any point, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think what really makes you think that it looks similar is, like, he has his hair parted the same way.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's whatever. I think that the fact that he was active at the time period in the same area, has to put him in the conversation. You never know, though. Somebody could have known that somebody was on Route 40 out killing people, and they could have been like, oh, I'm going to do it now.
And then it'll be blamed on him or whatever.
Right, because they knew he was active.
Yeah.
So,
well, several of his victims were found as well. And then the other thing about him is that he refused to ever talk about any of his other crimes. There was like a whole bunch of stuff with his trial and all of that, but he actually ended up getting the death penalty and never, like, absolutely refused to speak on any other potential crimes that he may have committed.
Yep.
So, people think, like, could he have killed more people?
I don't think it was him.
Okay.
I'm just going to come out and say,
all
like,
right, tell me your thoughts then, because I feel like you're trying to, like...
It's not the same MO. If he always attacked, like, sex workers and shit, then what is he just going to all of a sudden change his MO, act like a disabled motorist, and wait for some female to come by to kill her? No, I mean, I don't know. I think this is a coincidence that they both happened around the same time, or that he was active at the time of her murder. I think it's telling that her body hasn't been found. Who knows if this person that killed her put her in his vehicle and took her, states away.
Yeah.
And who knows? I don't think that it was this guy, though.
Yeah. Well, I mean...
That's my gut instinct.
Yeah, I just want to know who this freaking guy in the sketch is then.
I think that some due diligence may have been missed questioning people at the Army base, APG. It's not a base, right?
Aberdeen Proving Ground is a U.S. Army facility.
Okay, so not a base, but a facility. If it's a bunk area where people stay and shit.
Yeah.
I think some more could have probably been done there to try and narrow it down. I don't know. I could be totally off base and wrong with that, but...
All right, well, I mean, I think we're already kind of asking some questions, so why don't we dive into the questions we're left with? I don't know if you have been writing some down, John, but I have a handful here.
Yeah, I wrote a couple of them down. I would like to know what type of accelerant was used to try and start the fire.
Yeah, just said flammable liquid, so it's unclear exactly what said liquid was.
Who knows?
Is it Roncinol? Zippo fluid?
Right. Could have been that. Could have been gas. They could have had, a gas tank in the car.
Was it diesel? Would that show like what kind of car maybe they were driving? Do Ford Mustangs use diesel?
Maybe. Or could it have been alcohol? Could have been like Everclear or grain alcohol or something that was picked up at a liquor store.
Possibly.
Could they track down, people matching that description that went to a liquor store somewhat recently?
Yep.
And then really the murder weapon. You said that that investigators found an instrument
that may have been used. Yeah.
I'd like to know, how do you find an instrument that may have been used in blunt force trauma where there was tons of blood, fucking brain matter, hair, skull fragments and shit?
Well, was it like thrown in the snow and it kind of like wiped some of it away or something like that? Maybe.
But those were my main questions that I wanted to know. I was like,
Yeah.
It seems as though they never came up with a murder weapon. If they did, they haven't released it.
Yeah, so I just had a couple. And my main question really has to do with, why did the killer take her body? I agree with everybody else that has this question. They're trying to destroy evidence. Was it strictly for that? Where could they have put her body? Like,
I mean, you can go down the rabbit hole of like a bunch of fucked up scenarios. Yeah. Like, did he dump her in the river and it just so happened that the river carried her all the way out to the larger body of water and you're never going to find her?
Well, I think about, like, since we've talked about serial killers in this episode, but, you know, I'm not a huge, I don't know, there are people who, like, you know, deep dive into serial killers and all this stuff, and it's like the psychology behind it, and I can totally understand that. Like, I'm right there with people,
right.
But
you're torn because you don't want to give them like the
satisfaction.
Spotlight.
It's what they want, yeah.
Right? But it is interesting to know the psychology around it because then it helps you kind of, you know, build profiles going forward for other cases.
But then that makes me think like Ted Bundy, and forgive me if I'm wrong here because I don't do like deep dives into these people, but I've definitely seen like, you know, a documentary or a movie based on it here and there. And I'm pretty sure it was Ted Bundy that would like go back to the spot where he put the remains and he would like get the sexual release from it. So it's like, could it be something along those lines where it's like they want to go back to the spot and remember, whereas if they had just left her remains there, it's like not the same.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there are so many different avenues that you can go down.
Yeah. And then the other question I had too had to do with like the credit cards. I mean, I think that it was the guy that used the card that did it, but like why take the credit cards? Why not take the jewelry? Like, I feel like there were so many like picky, choosy things. It's like they didn't just take everything to hide all the evidence, or they didn't take all the valuables to get as much money as possible. It was like, I'm going to take credit cards, but I'm going to leave expensive jewelry. I'm going to, you know, maybe throw this shirt out of the car, but I'm going to take her body. I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to do that. Like, I just think it's weird.
It is weird, but say this was like an aspiring serial killer, or this was this person's first foray into something like this. Mistakes are made. Adrenaline's pumping. If, you know, this was the first time or second time that they've done this and they haven't honed their craft, you know, mistakes are made. Which makes me, I don't know, but you were mentioning like the credit cards and stuff. I want to know what the guy was trying to buy at Sears with a credit card.
Yep.
Because little pieces of information can really, you know, snowball into something bigger. What were you trying to buy? Were you trying to buy a new hammer to kill the next person because you left the hammer in the snow?
At the scene, and that's what they found?
And that's the instrument that they found, but there was no more evidence on it because of the snow and the melting of the snow?
Totally possible. But that, what you were just saying, like, kind of leads into my last question here. What about the shirt and the credit cards? If they're believing that the shirt obviously did not belong to Sheree, it was a man's shirt, and it had blood on it and all this probably other stuff on it, debris, whatever, and then assuming it belonged to the killer, then you're thinking, what could have been on that? Sweat DNA? What about the credit cards? If they had the card, you know, obviously he left it there, touch DNA on that. Are you able to get prints? Are you able to get DNA? Like, all of these things now in this case are these things that can be tested, because you have to think 2004 was the last article on this case. That's over 20, or that's nearly 20 years ago. So DNA and all of that has advanced significantly.
If this stuff has been stored,
yeah,
can they test it now?
Yeah. So, like, what are you guys doing on this case right now? Why haven't we heard about it for 18 years?
If nobody's pushing for answers in this case, maybe that's why, you know, it's just sitting there. You're talking about Maryland here. Baltimore, Maryland.
Yeah.
How many fucking homicides and murders and shit happen in Maryland in a year?
Yeah.
This could be one of those things where, you know, they don't have sufficient resources and detectives and officers to be going through all this information on these cold cases because they're backlogged with more recent ones.
Yeah. I think this actually makes me think of something that we talked about with the people over at Uncovered recently, which, big plug to Uncovered, we love them. But they were recently talking about how these police departments should let citizen detectives kind of help. And no, they don't need to know all the details, but it's like, what can they find? Like, you've been hearing about all these cases where, like, young, like, college students and, you know, other people are assisting in solving these crimes.
And that's something that I totally back, is like, if you are lacking resources and you don't have, you know, you haven't made forward progress in the case or in the investigation for quite some time, come up with a program where you can get these citizen detectives to sign an NDA.
Yep.
Whereas if they were to release the information that they are now privy to, they can be held accountable by law.
Mm-hmm.
And bring other people in that, they can devote a lot more work hours to view these cases with fresh eyes and maybe see something that somebody didn't see before.
Yeah.
There are resources outside of law enforcement that can work with law enforcement that can probably help close a lot of these cold cases.
Especially when you see, and you hear about it all the time too, it's like a lack of resources, a lack of officers in general, a lack of time. So many cases from years and years and years ago where it's like, if you just keep leaving it on the back burner, you're going to be 70, 80, 90 years out and you're never going to have answers.
Well, I think that nowadays with policing, that whole ego drive of, I'm not having anybody else help me because, we're the police and we're going to get this done, or nobody else is looking at this case because it's my case type thing.
Yeah.
It's starting to drop a little bit. It's not as prevalent as it was back in the day, but I think that more can be done. And I think there are a lot of resources outside of, like I said, law enforcement where you can work together and there are ways to hold people accountable to making sure that they're not, spreading all this information to the public.
Yeah.
If they want to help, we'll let you help, but you can't go fucking saying everything to everybody.
Exactly. Well, that's the point of an NDA. And I think it's like when you also have that fresh set of eyes and like these people who honestly devote all their time to it because it's like what they love doing and they want to delve deep and they want to do this research and they want to ask these questions. They might be asking questions that authorities never would have dreamed up at all. And
they're not jaded.
No, it's true. And they're not clouded by this other stuff that might be there or like stuck on a certain suspect or whatever.
Yeah.
So I hope, it'd be great if that could happen in this case. Like, I don't know why it's so quiet. I don't hear a lot about this at all.
I don't know. I think
there's a fucking lot with this case.
Yeah. I think that a lot of these older cases, there are so many others that these end up left on the back burner, like you said.
Yeah, it's tough.
So hopefully people hear this, sets a fire under somebody's butt, and they're like, oh, yeah, okay. I'm interested in this. I want to know more about it.
Yeah, that is the goal. Overall, Sheree's disappearance and what's believed to be murder crushed her family. Her mother described her as, quote, vivacious and outgoing and so friendly, end quote. Her family even put a loving statement in the Daily News on the 10th anniversary of her disappearance to remember their loved one they'd lost. I wanted to read it for you. It states, quote, 10 years are gone, wasted, hurting, thinking. Her leaving was so sudden, surely not her choice. Someone took her life. We hope he still looks back each day for fear of being known. For God has promised us, and we still wait and watch for that day he's bound to tell what he has done to cause this terrible loss and pain. Her little boy, almost a man, we know she would be proud, the way he's met his challenges so far along the way. Someday we know that we shall meet again. Eternity is just a breath away. Much lasting love, Mom and Dad Utes, son Tony Magaro, sister Vicky Hostetter, and family. If you know anything at all about who killed Sheree Magaro or have any idea where her body might be, please contact the Maryland State Police at 410-290-0050. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.